The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Tudors Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and here I am again at Cadhay House in Devon for the Wolf Hall weekend, and I am joined by two special guests today. We have Ben and George Miles. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Well, I'm pretty sure people know who you are.
Maybe Ben.
I think they know probably both of you, to be fair. Ben may be a little bit more recognizable because we see him on TV, probably, and in the theater. But why don't we start off by telling people, and we'll start with you, Ben, explaining why you're here this weekend.
I am here to talk about Hilary Mantel and more specifically my involvement in adapting the third novel, Mirror in the Light, for the stage for the Royal Shakespeare Company and Playful Theatre, who collaborated with the Royal Shakespeare Company to produce the plays. The third play premiered in 2021 in the West End in London. And I'm also here to talk about this book, the Wolf Hall picture book, which was a collaboration between Hilary, my fabulous brother George, and myself.
Wonderful. Well, you just segued to George then, I guess.
That's why I'm here, to talk about the book. I'm usually tagging on the coattails of my brother in some form or other, but particularly, we're here to talk about this strange collaboration between Hilary, Ben and I that kind of formed out of a kind of a whim around the character of Thomas Cromwell. When Ben got the part of Cromwell, I kind of said, let's take some photographs, let's take some pictures of his life. We'll walk his life through London and up the Thames and finish at the Tower. And then there was also a crossover between where Ben was born, near where Cromwell grew up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And our Nana, our mum's mum, used to live in Surbiton, which was down the road from Putney. So that got me interested when coincidences happen. So he said, let's start at our Nana's old house, Gateways, and walk up and trace the life and do it in a day.
Yeah, it's interesting that the block of flats where our grandmother lived was called Gateways, and that was our gateway to the journey that we made, and it ended up some years later in this book.
We didn't make it. We got as far as the Thames, Putney, which is like a tiny part of the whole journey. And Ben said, I've got 36 pictures of car parks, and I know all I need to know about the park. That was his research.
Wow.
Yeah, car parks did it. That's a whole other book. It hasn't come out yet.
A whole other book.
Cromwell's car parks.
So what was your knowledge of the Tudor era before this? Both of you.
Well, very little. I mean, school, primary school history. Henry VIII was a kind of big, round, redhead tyrant, and he had lots of wives, and names of which you couldn't remember as an 8-year-old and didn't really care about. Lots of beheadings. But it was, even though I didn't know much about it, it seemed it was a sort of collective assumption that it was a very big part of your history as an English person. There was an assumption that it was part of you and you were part of it, even though for me there was a lot of ignorance about it. You just sort of assumed an association with it. It was part of your national identity as an English person, part of our kind of international brand, as it were. It was exported around the world, but I didn't really know much about it until I read Hilary's books.
Until this project and Hilary's book kind of allowed you to unpick it and live it. I had even less. I went to a different school to Ben, so it was a liberal school, and they didn't even do British history, so I knew even less.
Wow.
I didn't know the succession of British kings and queens, so I hadn't even done that. And I think in a way for what we were doing, and also when I went to see the plays and read the books, that was an advantage, because I really didn't know how it was going to turn out. Everyone's saying, oh, we love the Tudors, even though we know how it turned out. I didn't. I was going, oh, he's dead. Oh, he's dead.
Wait, he dies?
Yeah, her head came off. So it was great. And so exploring it and unpicking it. And I think the books, the way Hilary writes, they're sort of unpicking, getting behind the sort of premeditated, sort of projected propaganda of history and royalty, etc. Yeah. And so that was an advantage because I was ignorant of that, so I could make work without having to even kick against that. So
she writes in the books about the myth of the Tudors, the Tudor myth, and how they were at pains to recreate a sort of an ancient legendary legacy of monarchy in England. They stole what they took from a lot of Arthurian legend and kind of reimagined it and rebranded
jousting.
it.
Let's get medieval.
Jousting, the joust, the tilt yard were kind of Tudor inventions in a way. They had the biggest rebrand of English monarchy you could imagine after the turmoil of the Wars of the Roses, of course. And so when the Tudors arrived, I think particularly in Henry's reign, they had to manufacture this myth and this legitimacy about themselves that would enable them to survive generation after generation. And that was a fascinating thing to learn about in the books, but also myths that predate even the Tudor era that Hilary writes about in Wolf Hall, particularly. There's
Robin Hood
about Robin Hood and about the origins of the Irish race and how there was this migration from Greece. Sort of demigods came up to Ireland and populated Ireland, and then slowly moved east into Wales and England. It's an amazing chapter. And the first time I met Hilary, I went up to her and said, "You've made me rethink what it is to be English." And those chapters really did. I suddenly realised that.
How did she respond again?
Oh, she just went, "Oh." And I felt like such a fool, such a sort of gibbering fan.
But it does. I know. I would have. I know what you're saying. I know the impulse to say that to her, because it does, as you said, it's like complete compressed layers of that you're English. You're an English person growing up, Tudor, Henry VIII, Elizabethan. This is your heritage. Do not deviate.
Yeah.
And it was nice to question that.
Yeah, and see the kind of backstage machinations of monarchy, and even this dynasty, the Windsor dynasty. Windsor's a made-up name, invented in the early 20th century to again rebrand this thing that we seem as a nation to want, to crave, to need. This sort of this chain of being from the lowest peasant to the monarch. You know, it's in our DNA, and we can't seem to shake it off. You know, unlike you Republicans, and you know, a lot of people in Europe, who've gone, no, what is that?
No taxation without representation.
Yeah, you know, and we try very hard to stop that in the United States.
You know, now I have to point out that I'm going back to the States before the 4th of July, because I felt like it wasn't right to be here on the 4th of July.
Right.
It only seemed right. I would have to be back there for that.
You have to celebrate very quietly.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I want to go back to earlier today, and you know, this isn't really about the topic of today, but I had asked George in the vehicle on the way here if he sees history all around.
Oh yeah.
You know, as somebody who, this is my first time here, everywhere I look, there is history, and there's so many layers of history.
Yeah, that I was thinking about what you said in the car when Ben was talking about like looking again at history, and there is almost like so much of it. You know, we're in a Tudor manor house. These are medieval dew ponds or whatever, fish ponds, and like I said to you, there's probably a stone circle underneath it.
Okay.
So, and it's that's the great thing about photography for me, because you have to choose where to focus with the thing on the front of the camera, and even an iPhone focuses somewhere. So that's saying, I'm not looking at that, I'm paying attention to that. And that kind of allows you to go, I'm tuning out of Elizabethan through the Stuarts and just, right, we're in Tudor period now, and sort of zero in on that, because there's so much, like you were saying, someone was saying to you, look at that, and you're going, what? Which bit? And there's a Tudor cottage next to a Georgian this and a 1970s shopping centre, and I kind of enjoy that, and I see that, but I think you kind of attune. Places like this, it's really easy to tune into certain layers.
Yeah. But other places are harder because there are more and more layers, particularly in cities. And in London, where we took a lot of our photographs for this book, it's kind of centuries deep, all the little layers you see. Even just looking down the high street, you see all eras, from kind of pre-Roman to something that was built yesterday. Right. It's all still there, and it takes quite an effort to kind of see it and filter it and focus your lens as it were. But it's rewarding when you do. But you have to. I always remember we went to see an exhibition of Stephen Shaw's photographs in Paris recently. And Stephen Shaw's a great American photographer, friend and collaborator of George's for many years, and he was talking about my mentor, photography being, as opposed to painting, where the painter starts with a blank canvas and tries to make something out of nothing. The photographer is trying to make something out of everything, because it's all there. You just have to choose what you
subtractive,
what you frame.
You have to frame.
Yeah. So that was I wasn't aware of that process so much when we put the book together. We took the pictures, but that's a really good way of putting it in terms of what we were trying to do in this book.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about what you were trying to do with that book and what people can. Why are you laughing?
What the hell?
Because every time we turned up at one of these things, like Hilary said, come along on my research for the third book, and we'd be going, right, we're going to Hampton Court on Sunday. And Ben and I would go, what are we doing here again with twice Booker Prize winner, day and night of the whatever, Hilary Mantel. And we would turn up, and Hilary said, you kind of turn up and make yourself open and see what's available and gifted to you. And sometimes it was like, sort of, are you kidding me? A resuscitation dummy with a beefeater looking on and somebody photographing it like that. Somebody set this up for the book, right? You couldn't think of a better metaphor for,
historical
fiction, and so you kind of go not knowing what you're doing. So we didn't. That's why I was laughing. We didn't know what we were doing, but when we got there, it came quite quickly and easy. And sometimes as a photographer, we're making pictures intuitively, and it takes someone like Hilary, who's a writer, to then go, I saw this in your picture, and you're going, oh yeah, that's definitely what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I could just sort of think, there's a picture here for some reason, make it, and then she would sort of explain what was going on. So that process was going on, but sometimes some of the pictures inspired her to revisit something or rewrite something, and at the same time Ben was working on her with sort of re-scripting the plays as they moved around and morphed. Right?
Each time we did the plays that I was involved in with Hilary started in Stratford-on-Avon, and then we moved them to the West End in London, and then eventually they went to Broadway. And each time they moved venue, we sort of tried to refine the plays a bit and rework bits, and so that
it got shorter.
Kind of
leaner, and then by the time they were on Broadway, they really knew what they're doing. It was like going to see Funkadelic. They were like on, and like
they weren't quite as funky as Funkadelic.
Not quite as funky, but like a Tudor Funkadelic. Really snappy, really and it was like an espresso version of the whole book, and then the Stratford version and the West End. It was like tight and really, like more like chic actually than Funkadelic.
I'll take chic.
I'll take chic. Ben being Nile Rodgers.
I'd like to see Nile Rodgers play Cromwell. I think he'd be a great
Yeah.
Cromwell. Yeah, it'd be very
So there's
Cromwell.
that. So there's all this sort of, and in that process, like they've got the novels and they're refining them into the stage play. That's a reductive process and refining. And like photography, like Ben was saying, you've got the whole world, but you just want to take this part, and it's like taking all this thing, but finding a sort of essence or quintessence of what that thing is, so you can share it with people.
Would you agree that everybody has an artistic ability? Both of you. I guess I would go to both. You're both artists.
Yeah.
I think everybody has that.
Yeah.
You just have to find it. What works for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever outlet that is.
Yeah. If you want to explore it, it's there for you. I mean, it's like being able to speak, everybody, or being able to hear or see. Everyone has an artistic sense. I think that's how we as people understand the world we're in.
Yeah.
Some people do it that way. Some people do it with logic and empirical science. Some people do it with art and myth. But we're all after kind of understanding and some idea of truth. But yeah, I think everybody has an artistic sense.
And there's so many different types of art, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's not just, I grew up in a family where many of my siblings were fantastic at drawing. That was their thing. And I could never draw. And I always thought, why did they get that? And I didn't get that. And I would try and I would try and I would try and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't paint. I always felt like I just didn't have it. I couldn't sing. I couldn't play an instrument.
Right.
And really, I guess for me, it turned out to be writing. And I'm not anywhere near the writer of Hilary or even you, Ben, but that's my outlet, I think, is to finding that creative. And I do like photography too.
It's easy, isn't it?
It's fun. It's fun when you see the beauty in something.
Yes.
And when somebody else looks at one of your your photographs and says, "Wow, that's a beautiful picture." Then you go, "Oh,
good.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you noticed that." So even though I can't draw like the rest of my family, I guess I found a different way to tap into
Drawing's
it.
overrated anyway.
Right. Hans Holbein,
too expressive, too expressive and
too
messy. All those emotions trying to come out.
You got,
Yes.
And what I really like is if someone says that's a beautiful photograph, and then they go, "But wait, I'm looking at a trash can. How has she done this? How have they done? How am I still looking at this thing?" And there's some sort of resonance or meaning here.
Yeah,
and that's when it gets really exciting. I think I meant to say this earlier with that example of if it's like a beautiful photograph of something that's not particularly beautiful or something that you wouldn't normally think is beautiful. There's a kind of static or a rubbing up of opposites, contradictions, and then there's something creative in that. And I think that happens with all these layers of history in England. And I think Hilary's writing, Hilary loved like where things collide and where those sort of potential opposites rub up against one another and create something else, and like create a question or an energy, for want of a better word.
And also she enjoyed places where that sort of veil was thin between this corporeal world and everything else that exists at the same time in other dimensions. I think she was very attuned to that, and you can go to places, and we went to places where you could kind of sense it yourself, but you'd see Hilary just sort of, there was like she went into another sort of mode, like acute listening mode and absorption mode, often very quietly, and she'd often kind of disappear and come back with a kind of loads of pages of notes that I think she inhabited that plane often. I think that's where she was kind of happiest in a way, or certainly at her most creative. I think that those sort of crossroads, those sort of liminal places.
She's like a true seer. SWR, like she was a real seer. So
clairvoyant.
And she used to talk about skewering things quite a lot. So often that would be like lots of layers or stuff, and then going through them and pinning them all together, and whether that's led to history or meaning or all sorts of stuff.
Wow. You guys, I'm so happy you joined me here today. Can you show the camera your book again and let people know maybe where they can pick it up?
Or everywhere, I imagine.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's a full picture book, published by Fourth Estate, and yeah, you know, all usual outlets. Yeah,
we'll get some links.
Yeah,
I'll share some links so people can pick up this great book.
It's quite unique, I think.
I thumbed through it and I thought, wow,
this is
no. It was more like, this is cool. It wasn't what I expected.
Good. That's
so
good.
yeah,
that's
good.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, George, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.